great way to start the second show of the new year. We have Mr. Jeff in the studio. He was able to get out of his driveway and dig out from the last snowstorm that we had in the last week or so. That's good to have him here. Get a little excited with a little Elvis. My name's Tom Crandell, and you're listening to This Week with Tom Crandell, a microphone operator. And a little Elvis. I think there's a few Elvis impersonators around, aren't there? Get one in here. You're listening to WBCK News Talk Radio. Compliments of 95.3 FM. As always, this is a live show. You're welcome to call in. Number's 269-441-9595 for Battle Creek listeners. Kalamazoo way would be 269-488-9595. Be happy to take your call. You're welcome to join the show. Tonight we have, of course, this day in military history. I want to talk about a primate that's been studied in China. It's kind of interesting. We have a comic moment, maybe a little econ if we get to it. There's some issues hanging out there that we're going to be having to live with the rest of this year. Affordable Care Act, things such as judges and their rulings, our public schools, some transparency in government, and really what the priority of our legislators. Some of that stuff's going to come up tonight. And with that, we will segue into this day in military history. January 12th, 1893, Hermann Göring, Nazi leader, commander of the Luftwaffe, is born. And I kind of gave him quite a long bio. Basically, he entered the Army in 1914 as an infantry lieutenant, eventually transferred to the Air Force, became an ace, shot down 22 Allied aircraft. He hung out with the right chaps there in the late 20s and 30s there in Nazi Germany. And, of course, became leader of the Luftwaffe and had the grand plan to defeat England through air power alone. But he switched tactics, shot himself in the foot, and then the next thing you know, he's swinging. I think he took poison in his after he was convicted at Nuremberg. January 12th, 1962, the United States Air Force launches Operation Ranch Hand, a, quote, modern technological area denial technique. I'll say that again, a modern technological area denial technique designed to expose the roads and trails used by the Viet Cong. Flying C-123 providers, U.S. personnel dumped an estimated 19 million gallons of defoliating herbicides over 10 to 20% of Vietnam and parts of Laos between 1962 and 1971. Agent Orange, named for the color of its metal containers, was the most frequently used defoliating herbicide. The operation succeeded in killing vegetation, but not in stopping the Viet Cong. January 12th, 1991. This one kind of jumped out at me. I thought it was a bit odd. After a two-day debate, a deeply divided Congress gave President George H.W. Bush the authority to wage war in the Persian Gulf. Recall, 1991 is when Iraq had invaded Kuwait. And it was actually an aggressor-type military confrontation that we'd been planning for since the end of World War II. The Senate voted 52 to 47 to give Bush to empower Bush to use armed forces to expel Iraq from Kuwait. The House filed suit on a vote 250 to 183. Seemed like that would have been a no-brainer vote. Really, I mean, if you look at Bush's votes that he got to go into Afghanistan after 9/11, I don't think I think Bernie Sanders might have voted against that. But the fact that it was such a close vote when one thug invaded another neighbor and proceeded to just rape that country. At any rate, that's the lowdown on the military stuff. It was rather thin tonight. I was a little bit disappointed. And, of course, if Tim or Alex are listening, I don't know if they noticed, but there was a problem with the show kicking off at the top of the hour. At any rate, I have in my hands here, I wanted to talk to you real briefly about prepping. That was also a segment I wanted to get to. we just had power outages, and, those of you who had generators, you were prepared, and fuel and everything else, and ways to heat yourself. There were a lot of people caught short, and they emptied store shelves fairly quickly. And we turned right around, and a company in Charleston, West Virginia, they had a tank, it was a storage tank. They don't know how much they leaked, but it's a foam agent used in coal processing. This is a supply company. All they do is store it. They don't manufacture it, and they don't process it. They just store it and sell it on. And there was a leak in this tank. The state officials are believing about 7,500 gallons leaked. Well, look what it has done. They're entering this was printed today, entering a fourth day without clean tap water has decimated 300,000 people. 4 days of their water supply, and this is what's going on. Downtown Charleston is a ghost town. Downtown many towns are a ghost town. Restaurants aren't open. Hotels aren't open. Homes are not, you can't live there. And in fact, it's even affected the airport. Because of a union contract between airlines and unions, flight crews and pilots must have hotels that meet certain thresholds of services. And lack of water violates the agreement, and consequently, they're canceling flights. Now, you can't bathe, you can't brush your teeth, you can't wash clothes in it. The only thing you can do with this water is flush a toilet. And, of course, like flies on animal dung in the woods, the EPA and the state environmental quality folks, they're all over this. And they're testing, and it will be restored, but it says here, virtually every restaurant was closed Saturday, unable to use water to prepare food, wash dishes, or clean employees' hands. Meanwhile, hotels had emptied and foot traffic was down at many retail stores. These homeowners aren't able to cook, and they ran out of water. That was the first item, and I talked about that. That's your number one prepping item is water. That was the first thing gone. And these, of course, the stores are any kind of survivalist food that you can live in or live off of without too much prepping is gone. People were reduced to buying ice, and they were going to melt it and take baths. It was more important to have baths than I think to produce drinking water. But I'm wondering, we have not heard any incidences of looting yet. Might come out after everything's re-inhabited, because then you'll be able to find out. Or if it gets really bad. But something tells me in West Virginia, the looters might get a little bit different welcome than, let's say, if they were in Bridgeport, Connecticut, or up in Massachusetts somewhere. And so perhaps the looters know better than to loot in West Virginia, because I think every truck has a gun in it, and sometimes more. Well, anyway, that is today's lesson. We're faced with it daily, or weekly. We come up with examples of how disrupted lives can be, and it's fresh in our memories based on the power outage that we just had through here. And so it is something to pay attention to. The store shelves are empty, and all the water's gone. And the government did bring in about 600, 700, 800,000 liters of water for 300,000 people. That's not even 3 liters per person. How long do you live on 3 liters of water? This is pretty serious. People have evacuated. They've gone out to the areas that have clean water. The hotels out there are booming. The restaurants out there are booming. It's a windfall for them. Kind of like many of the businesses in Battle Creek during the power outage. The people needed somebody to help them solve their problems, and I'm sure many were happy to do that. And okay, let's see. What are we going to get into next? I saw an article on school discipline, and I thought we'd talk about that. I think the important thing to understand is the federal government is trying to help us produce the best educated kids, right? I know the teachers are dedicated to that, but how much of the teachers' hands are tied by rules and regulations? And I know there's teachers out there. I don't know if any of them are listening now. It would be great if you called in, because you may have already heard about this, But there's been a new memo. This comes from the Daily Caller, and it's a new memo from the Department of Justice telling schools that they must implement race-based punishments. That's right, quotas for punishment. All right, taking a break. We'll get into this on the other side. Number's 441-9595 if you care to join the show.
I want to thank everyone for making this day so special. Dad, you've been my inspiration. I love you.
I love you too.
And Mom, I miss you so much.
Type 2 diabetes steals the lives we cherish most, but it can be prevented. Know your risk before it's too late. Stop diabetes. Learn how at checkupamerica.org or talk to your doctor.
Have you heard? Scam artists are trying to trick seniors into giving them their Medicare number.
I heard that. This happened to my friend. A man came to her door wanting to sign her up for the new Medicare program. Well, when she got her Medicare summary notice, it was full of charges for services she hadn't received. So I did something about it. I joined the Senior Medicare Patrol, where I teach others to protect their Medicare numbers, review statements to spot false charges, and report suspected fraud.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Crandell. You're listening to This Week with Tom Crandell. The number, if you care to join, is 269-441-9595. If you happen to be listening west of the area, it's 269-488-9595. We'll start this second segment with a little Toby Keith. All right, just before the break, I was talking about this Department of Justice letter. It also came from the Department of Education. They're instructing public schools throughout the country to cease punishing disruptive students if they fall into certain racial categories, such as black or Hispanic. The letter was released Wednesday. This is fairly new. You'll probably hear about it this week. Near the end of the week, Fox News will have it. The letter released on Wednesday states that it is a violation of federal law for schools to punish certain races more than others, even if those punishments stem from completely neutral rules. For example, equal numbers of black students and white students should be punished for tardiness, even if black students are more often tardy than white students. Now, the Daily Caller asked several education experts to weigh in on the letter's recommendations. All three raised serious concerns about the ramifications of changing school disciplinary procedures to engineer equal outcomes across the races. Their biggest concern? It's going to hurt the African American kids disproportionately, because typically they are in school systems in the urban areas that are going to have lower graduation rates, more disruptions in class, and the teachers have to have a way to getting these kids out of class. But now it's going to result in actually allowing some kids' behavior to continue. That will disrupt the classroom and the kids who want to learn. And this is coming from the Department of Justice. They are trying to engineer. This is that fundamental transformation, the fundamental changing. They introduce quotas into punishment. It goes on here to say it's ridiculous to assign quotas for discipline based on race. If we did that for one thing, we'd have to believe that Asian students are severely under-disciplined. Think about that. We have to believe that Asian students are severely under-disciplined. It's because they're never tardy, or rarely. They're the ones who score the highest. And even major colleges have to make exceptions if it was all on, the scores, the important SAT and ACT scores. They'd crowd out everyone else. Yeah, let's see. It's as best I can tell, Ms. Frederick Hess, he's the Director of Education Policy at the American Enterprise Institute, described this as troubling. And as best as I can tell, they are telling schools that even if you have policies that are clearly neutral, they are clearly even-handed, that they are clearly designed to create safe environments for students and educators, Department of Justice still might come down on you like a ton of bricks. He said it's desirable for schools to eliminate policies that treat black students unfairly, but these new recommendations overshoot it by a mile. The only possible, the only possible explanation is that you've got a room full of civil rights lawyers having a field day without talking to real people, the educators who are going to be affected. This is the teachers. This is local control. And this is coming down from Washington, from up on high. This other expert from an education institute, Pullman, also worried about the effect on classrooms. She said she has spoken to teachers who experienced a breakdown in the classroom learning environment when policies like this were implemented. Kids of the favored race know they can get away with more, so they misbehave more. And the well-behaved kids lose out on instruction because the teacher is busy trying to manage unruly students she can't send to the principal's office. So what do you think about that? And as parents, we can feel one thing, but if I'm a teacher, I almost feel like I'm now a medical doctor and the government's taking over of course, they've been at the education system for a long time, but I'd almost feel like a doctor in the Affordable Care Act. What you can charge and where you can go and what you can do and who you can treat. So they are... And it didn't pass through Congress. This is one of those 40,000 rules that were passed in 2013 that schools across the country, and I'm sure there'll be many lawyers, many trial lawyers just waiting to pounce all over this one. The school discipline thing is going to harm a lot of kids, good kids, who want an education and want to learn in school. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. Turns out, whenever we want to stop something or some group, special interest group, it might be an admirable one, a righteous one, you might say, or it could be a kooky one, but they have to sue the federal government in the country's second highest court. It is the D.C. Circuit Court, U.S. Court of Appeals. And the judges are appointed by the executive branch, like all our other judges. And now with the new rules in the Senate, the executive branch has wide flexibility in who they can nominate, who under other circumstances would not get enough votes and would never pass. They would never be seated on the board. But that's not the case right now. 3 people have been appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, Circuit Court. Their names are Robert Wilkins, Cornelia Pillard, and Patricia Ann Millett. And these names mean nothing to us out in flyover country, but believe you me, this is their wish list. This is Chuck Schumer's, Bernie Sanders. This is their wish list. President Obama, Eric Holder. This is some serious institutionalizing in a fundamental way, because these are lifetime positions. And I'm looking at a picture of these people. They aren't that old. In fact, one of the ladies, she looks to be 40, even in her late 30s maybe. And so the legacy of these appointments will be with us for years and years and years, upholding things like groups wanting to sue to stop this race-based, quota-based disciplinary problem. Or let's say the federal government, Derek Holder, decides that homeschooling, we really don't have the right to that. He's made that statement before. Well, if somebody sues them, they have to go through this court. And again, it's not going to make TV tonight, and there won't be a reality show about it. It won't be on TMZ. You won't see this on TMZ or MTV or any popular channel with the low information voter. But by being able to appoint who they want with no opposition, no checks and balances, it's going to get scary real quick. And I've mentioned it before, and Mark Levin has written the book. It's not so much the book that he wrote, the Liberty Amendments, And it's not so much his example of amendments, these are just his ideas. But there's been a groundswell. We're coming up on a break in the bottom of the hour. There's been a groundswell with this, what's called an Article 5 convention. And there was a meeting recently in Baltimore, Maryland. It was before Christmas. We're going to get into that and more coming up after the bottom of the hour. We appreciate you tuning in. We're glad you're listening, and we do appreciate it very, very much. We'll see you in a few minutes.
I've changed apartments several times. My roommates have always been trouble. Now, because of the economy, I've had to move back home. When my mom gets drunk, she tells me everything I do is going to fail. I get into arguments with her about her drinking. Dad goes to Al-Anon family groups. I didn't think Al-Anon would work for me, but every time I go, I feel better. If someone's drinking bothers you, you might find help in an Al-Anon family group meeting right here in our community. I found support there. You can too. Call 1-888-4-AL-ANON or visit alanonfamilygroups.org.
Never look a howler monkey in the eye. Fried ants are delicious. We finished a clinic in a rainstorm.
Really?
My students actually ended up teaching me.
In la keg, a la king.
Think managing a sales team is tough. Try working with 5 different villages. After 2 months, I was ready to quit, but after 2 years, I didn't want to leave. I didn't know I had it in me.
Turn 2 years of service into a lifetime of experience. To all the Peace Corps volunteers, past, present, and future, thank you for your service to your country and the world.
Yeah, who says that these days? I want to be elected. I don't know anybody. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Crandell. You're listening to This Week with Tom Crandell on WBCK News Talk Radio 95.3 on the FM dial. That's a little Alice Cooper coming from the 70s. I know Mr. Producer probably has the vinyl. You probably have this album in vinyl, don't you? Yeah, you probably do, along with thousands of others. The number, if you care to join the show, is 441-9595. Coming up next, we're going to talk about, really, it's a discussion of limited government, or I don't think we'll ever have small government, but it's certainly limited government. And there's a move. I mean, you just look out in the news every day, and you can just seize these things. That for example, the school discipline thing. We have Department of Justice reaching out from Washington into Battle Creek, Michigan, and telling our teachers how they're going to discipline their kids. And there'll be ramifications, and that's only one example. This other one is really kind of striking. If anyone's ever been involved in a large launch of a project at a corporation, perhaps it's not $1 trillion thing like the Affordable Care Act, but perhaps it's as relative to the numbers in the corporation, it's just as significant to that business. And you have a window of opportunity from, say, in October 1 through March 31 to sign up 7 million people, or to sell 7 million units, or to revamp 7 million square feet. There's always a plan. And the question is, in the private sector, how often do the project managers and ultimately the people responsible for the project, how often do they keep a pulse of the project to find out the status of the project and where it's at? I would contend that a big project is going to have a lot of oversight. And weekly meetings? Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable to consider that you might have a weekly meeting. Weekly meetings are good. I think Mitt Romney met with the Democrats in Massachusetts every week. The Democrat majority leaders in the House and the Senate in Massachusetts when he was the governor. Every week, even though they didn't agree on everything, they met every week and they talked. Well, the White House is opposing an Obamacare transparency, and the excuse they're giving is it's administratively burdensome. So our representatives in the House represent the people. The senators are supposed to represent our states, which they don't, of course, but the House of Representatives is designed to represent the people in Washington. And our representatives have passed 2 bills that they'll languish in the Senate, they'll never pass. But the bills are pretty straightforward. They want Health and Human Services to start reporting weekly on the rollout of Obamacare. They want data. They want who's signing up, youth, who's how many of them are paid, and it's too burdensome. And so the White House has signaled, they stopped short of threatening a veto, but they have signaled that they don't even want to advise us when they know our personal information has been compromised on the website. That was one of the bills, was to force the government to tell which people have been violated. Now look what happened at Target over Christmas. And now it's struck more people. I don't know if it's, I think Neiman Marcus was one. I could be wrong on that one, but I know recently some other retailers. Well, the fascinating thing is, Target, they had upwards of 70 million people were compromised. And how quickly did they know? Now they're being offered a free ID protection for a year, and Target's really taking care of them. But our executive branch, it's some serious chutzpah, don't you think? It's just too burdensome. The problem is we put up with it. And we forget about it. Now, many of us don't, but we're like lone voices in the wind, and we feel helpless. That's why many people I've talked to, and I mentioned it before on the show, you just don't feel like voting anymore. Your vote doesn't matter. And I compared it to being a soldier in a foxhole in Afghanistan or Vietnam or somewhere else. You're not fighting for mom and apple pie. You're fighting for the guy right next to you. So you better vote, because you're voting for the guy right next to you. And it might be your kids or your family or neighbor, something like that. Take a grander view of it. Find some way to justify voting. Something other than it's your, duty as a citizen in the republic. But the executive branch is refusing to be transparent about the performance of this huge rollout. They're just keeping us in the dark. This wouldn't fly in the private sector. I see this as another tipping point for what Mark Levin has started, which is this dialogue about a second way the Constitution has given us to amend the Constitution, which controls the federal government, other than going through Congress. Because they're the scoundrels, both sides of the aisle, all three sides up there. They really, there's a few that are good. You can identify those by the ones who maybe co-sponsored the Fair Tax Bill, because they want to actually give our money back to us. But the idea is the states to call a convention. Actually, the states have to request, 38 states have to request the Congress call a state constitution convention. Congress has no power other than they must call it. At that point, 34 states can, or is it 34 states? 34 states ask Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments. Those amendments then go through the same ratification process. Then 38 states have to approve it, which is what has to be done now in a congressional constitutional convention. The whole point is, it was a discussion, and very few groups were talking about an Article 5 convention until Levin came out with his book. Of course, he's a big-time radio guy and gets lots of FaceTime, and he does a darn good job at it. But recently, this comes from ABC News in Baltimore. It is something never before done, and like so many journeys, it is beginning with a single step. That's what Levin has been saying. It's going to start with a single step. The IT is an Article 5 convention in which states propose amendments to the Constitution, and that single step was taken through a letter sent to every state lawmaker, each speaker, and each Senate president in the country, amid a backdrop of perceived dysfunction in Washington, D.C. that includes the troubled rollout of the Affordable Care Act, a partial government shutdown, and a national debt climbing ever higher. The federal Leviathan is out of control. Everybody knows it. We're sticking our heads in their sand, or we're paying attention, but we're really not picking anything up from it. Now, it seems that more than 100 legislators from 30 states confirmed they would attend this December 7th meeting at Mount Vernon. They're they called it the Mount Vernon Assembly. And this group invited each state to send up to 3 lawmakers to Mount Vernon on December 7th. And there ended up being a waiting list because of the capacity limits. They were only able to allow 100 in. And it's interesting, I mean, those who are paying attention, those who know politics, know that both coasts are blue. Much of the flyover country is red. And Maryland happens to be a coastal state. It's an East Coast state, and it's very blue. That's where I think Joe Biden comes from. No, does Biden come from? No, he doesn't come from Maryland. But it's a very blue state. Now, they talked to a spokeswoman for the Maryland House Speaker, Michael Bush. He says he hasn't heard of the assembly. They don't plan on attending it, and they aren't going to have anything to do with it. So you can imagine the 30 states are the 30 states that might be red states, that think we have real problems. This is a huge event. Idaho is looking into state rules for their own state rules for a state convention. Who's eligible? What would get you recalled immediately? And Indiana has already gone through the process. I think South Carolina may have as well. And it's interesting that this whole push for this meeting, they wanted to keep outside influences to a minimum. And that means special interest groups. And for those of you wondering what that is, they wanted to keep it to a minimum. So all attendees must pay for their own expenses, and they all must be currently serving as a state legislature. There are no lobbyists. There are no special interest groups allowed. These were simply elected representatives. Now, we're talking about state representatives. Now, in principle, the U.S. House of Representatives is supposed to represent us in Washington. That's our close connection, so to speak. Well, our state legislatures are even on a much closer basis to us. I mean, show of hands, how many have ever out there in the listening audience have ever talked to your state rep? They're quite accessible. They take phone calls. They call people back. They're very accessible. And enough citizens picked up the phone and called their local reps that they generated enough activity out of 30 states. Now remember, you need, 34 to ask for a convention? And the wheels are beginning to turn in 30. And yes, it'll take time. But 100 legislators attended, but there was a waiting list because of capacity limits. Where will the next one be? Man, we could only hope for like the New Orleans Superdome and fill it with legislators and people. What kind of attention would that get in Washington? That'd scare the bejesus out of them, I think is what it would do. The whole idea was started by a fellow by the name of George Mason back in 1787. He almost kiboshed the original Constitutional Convention because he proposed just 2 days before that the states be allowed to amend the Constitution like this, because Mason believed leaving the amendment process solely up to Congress. Get this is back in 1787. This is great stuff. Mason believed leaving the amendment process solely up to Congress would result in no amendments of the proper kind being obtained by the people if the government should become oppressive. Do we really have to talk about the definition of oppressive? I think we live with it daily, don't we, in so many aspects? We're going to get on to another one, and this oppressive takes money out of your pocket every day. But there's a lot that needs to be done. There's still a lot of questions. People always say they're afraid of a runaway convention. How can you have a runaway convention? If you get majority votes, a runaway something is like a minority, an extreme minority, wielding huge amounts of power and pushing their agenda on the majority. That's a runaway process. And you cannot empower a minority at an Article 5 convention. It takes too many states to get anything done. So if a majority of the American people, as represented by their state representatives and state senators, if a majority of them, through their reps, want these changes, That isn't a runaway convention. That's progress. That it would be a problem if 6 states wanted their way. Or it would be a problem, well, let's see. There was a Democrat majority in 2009 and 2010 when the Affordable Care Act was passed. So a very small majority, a very slim temporary majority, concocted this huge scheme, and in 2 years they were gone. Many of them are scattered to the wind. Some of the remnants are still here, but there's nobody to hold accountable. And the new paradigm they have us believe now is, well, once one Congress passed it, you can't change it. Unless you're the president and you just want to change it. Then you can change it. Because nobody's questioning them on this. Republicans certainly aren't. Oh, they're huffing and puffing, but they aren't doing anything about it. They aren't able to stop it. Well, that would be a runaway process. When a fleeting majority, and we're talking about a 2-year majority out of 230 years of being a country, a 2-year majority has saddled us with something like this that we can't have transparency on. And in fact, the veil was lifted a little bit on that transparency for the healthcare. Everybody's been wanting to know how many people have paid, how many people have paid. The government is not telling us. And from the federal exchanges, they aren't. But some private insurers are. I may get to that yet tonight. But this Article 5 convention has come about because, well, for example, this is another good one. You know, recently they reduced the pensions to the military. They've reduced the increase. They've reduced the cost of living is what they've done. And there was total uproar about that from all the veterans, and rightly so, from all the veterans groups. It's a $6 billion expense. And we're $17 trillion in debt, and they can't find $6 billion. Really? Well, from the Washington Free Beacon, Senate Democrats block amendment to restore military pensions. It seems that the Republicans put forth an amendment, and it was blocked from being added to the bill that the Democrats were passing. They were going to restore the military pension cuts by closing a loophole that allows tax refunds to go to illegal aliens. Now, that sounds like they're taking money away from working families. The problem is, there was a study done by the, it was the Inspector General. The Treasury Inspector General found that some of these people getting these tax, what they call them here on the first page, tax refunds, that sounds like it's something you've earned and they owe you. And that's not the case at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. It takes the lid off something that's horrendous. And now I'm coming up on a break here at 48 after the hour. We're going to get into it. Because people who aren't authorized to work in this country, children who don't exist, and children who don't live in this country do not deserve to get any U.S. tax dollars of any kind, manner, shape, or form. And a bill was put forth to cut that loophole. It's waste and fraud that was identified. But they said our veterans, they told them no.
What would I do if I got tired when I'm driving? I'd probably have someone else drive me home because I wouldn't want to take the chance of, dying. I'm still young.
Yeah, sometimes I almost fall asleep when I'm driving and it really scares me, so I pull off the road.
Most times I'll try to get some coffee, anything that will give me a little burst.
And usually I'm not the one that drives because I do have the game, so I make my nerdy friends or somebody that, doesn't have athletics to deal with drive.
You can't text and pay attention to the world around you, and you definitely can't text and drive. Every year, deaths due to distracted and negligent driving are increasing. In fact, while drunk driving rates have dropped greatly, negligent driving fatalities have skyrocketed. Find out more at negligentdriving.com.
We can start paying attention a little bit. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Crandell. You're listening to This Week with Tom Crandell. We have Mr. Jeff in from Access Vision. He was winter stuck in his driveway last weekend, and it was pretty miserable out, and he needed some time to try to dig out, and so he had that, but we're welcoming him back. You can catch the show out on Facebook or Access Vision, Comcast 98, Channel 98.
16.
16?
916.
And 916.
Cadillac is 98.
Cadillac's 98. Okay. Channel 16 and 916, you can always catch his final editing work extraordinaire. Before the break, we're talking about kind of out-of-control processes, and of course, we're being led by people. The priorities are pass bills that hurt our veterans. We promised them these things, and, the interesting thing was we took it away, but at the same time, federal civilian retiree pensions were not touched at all. So why didn't they hit them first? Now, we aren't going to get Barbara Boxer and those people in the Senate to change. They're not going to change. We're left with them. Then Levin writes liberty amendments. Says, wait a minute, there's a way. Oh, you're crazy, Mark. It'll never happen. There'll be a runaway convention. But the steady drumbeat has produced some real results to limit the kinds of things that these people are doing to us. The fact that they did pass the bill, this budget bill was born out of the House. The Republicans voted for it too, and I'm really sorry. We'll make it up. We'll fix it later. We'll amend legislation later, constitutionally, by changing it via legislative process rather than executive fiat. And so here was the chance to do that. And you have to recommend Kelly App for it, but really, you had to do it. So I'm not sure she's really a pioneer or anything. She just happens to be the mouthpiece. But Barbara Boxer told her that she was fiddling while Rome burns, and it affects our military, our veterans. And they were given a chance to fix it, and they didn't. So we want these people to run our health care, and we want these people to tell our schools how to teach the kids. And it's like a death spiral. Blocking military pensions. That's unbelievable. And then, of course, with the transparency thing with Obamacare, that, premiums are not being paid. There's a lack of youth signing up. Many more are taking Medicaid, which is free. Insurers the whole thing's headed for a bailout. The whole thing is headed for a bailout. It's ripe for it. Because how are you going to, if you don't, this is going to be 2, 3, 4 years from now, how are we going to deny health care to grandma? We have to bail out the insurance company. We have to help the insurance company help grandma. And children, little children. So that's the kind of arguments that are winning these days. So, Article 5 convention. It may come up. I'm going to continue to look at it. I know that. And I think we need to. All right, I was going to tell you about, I'll end the show, and we'll get into this. China has been studying a primate for the last, 50, 60 years. Incredible amounts of governmental resources have been poured into it. It's quite rare. It's rarely seen. It's like many of those animals in the Amazon forest. You know it lives there. You just don't often see it. And there's been incredible advancements made in the preservation of this primate. And it's called the Yeren. And the fact that it has a government-focused support is interesting. Wait a minute, Mr. Jeff, did I tell you that it's a bipedal primate? It walks on 2 feet? It does. It walks on 2 feet. It's anywhere from 1 to 2 meters tall. And it's very reclusive. It's very rare, but there have been hundreds and hundreds of, over the last 10 years, hundreds of sightings. Over the last several thousand years, thousands of sightings. And so it's bipedal, doesn't go down on all four. It's strictly bipedal. And it is a primate. And they call it the Yeren. And it's actually, some are drawing comparisons to the North American Bigfoot and how it's much the same. Family groups have been seen, smaller ones, larger ones, females and males. And they've done, the Chinese government has a preservation area that they watch some other baboons in, but this is a real hot spot for this sighting, the Yeren. And this kind of stood out to me because I recently saw this, I think he's a real first-class idiot. Some guy down in San Antonio claims he shot a Bigfoot. And his only problem is 2 years ago. Well, first of all, I think it was 2 years ago that he shot it. Well, it was 2 years ago he shot it, but 2 years prior to that, he got busted for a fake Bigfoot story where I think his brother-in-law dressed up in an ape suit. So he doesn't have a lot of credibility. He's putting out this picture of this face, and it's the laughing stock. It's almost like a body on display at a circus, and he's done that. But what convinces me this one's a hoax, if it were real, the Discovery Channel would be in on it. National Academy of Sciences, maybe. Some major anthropologists would be in. He would already have book and movie deals and show deals set, because he would have the rarest find in the world if he had a body. And the fact that he's playing coy about it, I know it's fake. But the Yeren isn't fake. And there have been too many good sightings, and in fact, we now have a new TV show. And I think it's a $10 million Bigfoot hunt. Turns out it's Hollywood screwing it up. Don't waste your time. First-hand knowledge, I heard a critique of it, and it's basically Survivor. And they send teams out, and you have to gather evidence. You have 24 hours to gather the best evidence you have that Bigfoot exists. You bring it back. The worst evidence is voted off. And then it goes on. And so they've really, I imagine the guys at Finding Bigfoot, those guys are chomping at the bit. All right, that's enough of Bigfoot. To lighten the mood a little bit, nearly 700 dead in Syria, rebel-on-rebel clashes. Let's see, 697 people have been killed. These represent 351 fighters from the Islamist and mainstream opposition brigades. That's more than we've killed in Afghanistan in the last year, I'll bet. And another 246 from the Islamic State. So there's a total of 597 bad guys have been taken off our battlefield. So, and they did it to themselves. I think this is just an example where maybe Assad maybe should win this civil war over there. Turns out the freedom-loving countries in Libya and Egypt, they weren't so kind to Christians. Turns out Libya just said all their laws will be Sharia-based. How about that? And lastly, on the Comic Minute, and that's probably all we're going to get to, is New York City has a new mayor. And he's already implementing his strategy and staffing positions, but he strong-armed his ideological ally into the office of City Council Speaker. She's the second most powerful in the city. She proposed legislation will pass through her office, and she will set the agenda of the City Council. So here we have the very same crowd that bankrupted Detroit and has screwed up Chicago and L.A. and all our other major urban areas. They now are solidly in control of New York City. I think the next 2 years will be eye-opening with what they accomplish together. Turns out the new city council person, she's Occupy. She's been arrested. She's earned her stripes. She's got a lot of street cred with the 99 percenters. We'll keep tabs on her and find out what crazy rules they're putting out. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
I've changed apartments several times. My roommates have always been trouble. Now, because of the economy, I've had to move back home. When my mom gets drunk, she tells me everything I do is going to fail. I get into arguments with her about her drinking. Dad goes to Al-Anon family groups. I didn't think Al-Anon would work for me, but every time I go, I feel better. If someone's drinking bothers you, you might find help in an Al-Anon family group meeting right here in our community. I found support there. You can too. Call 1-888-4-AL-ANON or visit alanonfamilygroups.org.
The Independent Payment Advisory Board was created by the Affordable Care Act, and it is a board tasked with managing healthcare dollars, managing the expenses of healthcare dollars. Yeah, the president has judicial oversight, but IPAB doesn't. I'm telling you, this is scary. Mr. Producer, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who watches the show on Axis Vision. Jeff and I are flattered that you would tune in and listen in. I would invite you to pay attention right on your calendar. Sundays at 6. It's live. You're welcome to call us, 441-9595.